This time in the Magic Kitchen, we are joined by author Brandon Weston to discuss Ozark Mountain healing traditions.
I'm Leandra Witchwood.
And I'm Elyse Wells.
And welcome to the Magic Kitchen podcast, where we talk about magic, kitchen witchcraft, herbs,
and everything in between.
As you may know, the Magic Kitchen podcast is fully and independently funded by the Witchwood Tea House. So show us some support and head over to thewitchwoodteahouse.com to purchase some deliciously hand-blended loose leaf teas or one of my other botanical products. As a special thank you for your support, please use POD 15 at checkout to take 15% off of your next order. So without any further ado, let's get to the episode. Blessed be. So we are in November. Oh, it's almost Thanksgiving. Where is this year gone? I can't believe it's flown. It's just absolutely flown.
Yeah, 2024 has been it's been a really transitionary year for me. I'm almost through my Saturn return. So I think that's part of it. But I feel like it feels like seasons in a different way. Like we went through portals at every turn in this year.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
To see where the rest of the year takes. So it's really beautiful right now because as we head into winter, I'm mostly focusing on my writing. So my first book, my novel, What the Water Remembers, will come out September 30th, 2025. And that one is in a really beautiful place of it's just waiting. It's just in stasis until it comes out. But I'm working on my first nonfiction book, which if you join Patreon today, you will actually see the official title for that book. I'm only sharing it for patrons until we have the approval from Llewellyn, my publisher, to really get that out there. But
good.
It is official, so I'm excited to share that with patrons. And patrons are where, if you join my Patreon, that's where you're supporting what I do. You're supporting my work here with Leandra and the Magic Kitchen podcast, setting up all these interviews, doing all the editing, all of these things. And you're also supporting the other work I'm doing. I have 2 other podcasts. Somebody told me recently they had no idea I had other podcasts. So I was like, oh my gosh, I have got to mention that on the Magic Kitchen.
You got to mention it.
So for a long time, people have been like, well, what about all the sacred places you visit? I want to hear more about them on the podcast. And Magic Kitchen is about witchcraft. So I find myself mostly focusing on, the craft and the work I'm doing, not necessarily the nitty gritty for every sacred site. And so a few months ago, I began Seeking Numina with Elyse Wells. And that is my solo podcast where I'm taking you to sacred places. And it's been an interesting journey of intimacy, vulnerability. I've been called to share, because it's just me, I guess. I just feel more comfortable going into details that I'm now learning people do want. So I've shared in the first episode the details of how I moved to Greece and how that came about and the spirit-led calling that got me here. And then moving through, I'm going to be taking you to the places that I find most sacred. Right now, I have my first episode out with a guest, with my friend George Lizos. He is a priest of Hellenic polytheism from Cyprus. And Cyprus is where Aphrodite originally entered through Greece. So the mother goddess that's worshipped in Cyprus is extremely unique and powerful. And so we talk about that. We talk about Delphi as well. I highly recommend. And the coolest part of Seeking Numina podcast is it's a video. So you can listen to it on all the podcast platforms, but you can also subscribe on my YouTube, Seeking Numina, and you will be able to see videos and photos of all the sacred places. Because as I was doing it, I was like, oh man, I really think I need an editor. And luckily, somebody stepped forward. So if she's listening, I'm grateful, girl. So I have an incredible editor at Your Witchy Librarian, Jordan, on Instagram, if you want to follow her incredible journey. So it's been really beautiful doing that podcast. And then I have another one, Cosmic Theater Mystery School with Megan Plummer. She is a friend of Leandra and I's. Megan and I go back so far, like before. She actually went to high school with my husband, and then we met at a wedding many years ago. And so we've been friends for like a decade, and it's been beautiful to have this connection. She's a lead paranormal investigator with First Call Paranormal, which is based in Maryland. And she's also a medium. So we talk about, on the Cosmic Theater Mystery School, we talk about the intersection between the paranormal and the spirit work, you know, and unfortunately in the paranormal investigation world, that seems to be neglected. So we've really focused on bringing the spirit back into ghosts, you know, something that it's crazy to me that that's revolutionary. So yeah, that's what I'm up to.
So much going on.
Lots of conversations.
Both of us, we will both be in the Witches Winter Festival with Wendy Mata and Anwin Avalon, Eva Dominguez. It's going to be a 2-day online festival where we're going to offer. So, I mean, there's so much. I'm going to do something on like cozy winter magic with tea. And yeah, that's coming up. What were the dates?
December 12th and 13th.
Yes. Thank you.
And actually, as we were preparing to record this, I realized I'm kicking it off. I'm doing the opening ceremony.
Nice.
Yeah, it's going to be really interactive. Like, so Wendy Mata, Bruja Botanica, as you know, Leandra and I, to say she's a friend of the podcast is like an exaggeration. She's family.
Yeah.
And
she's awesome.
She had a different vision for this, and it is for it to be a party. And that's the feel. Like, we're really trying to celebrate winter. And so that's what my ritual will focus on. It's going to be an extended meditation and connection to winter's warmth. Because too often we focus on the negatives, the cold, the sleet, the sleet.
Yeah. The needing to be inside and bundle up. I mean, that's not bad, but
yeah, we're going to connect.
Sometimes we need a little more.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to connect to the positives of winter and the beauty to be found.
I love it. Absolutely. Oh, and I actually spent the weekend, this past weekend with Wendy Mata and Tanae Stewart, where we planned out 2025 between the three of us in trying to get, see what we can offer our communities. And it was such a wonderful weekend. We spent 4 days in Salem. You probably see the videos and the pictures on social media if you head over to Instagram. And I'm overwhelmed, to say the least, because we did so much planning and we have so many great things coming ahead. And one thing I solidified was something that our audience has been asking for, and my members of my community in the Rebel Mystic community have been asking me about, because I mentioned it, but there was no information. So now I have information on it. I actually have the waitlist page ready. So that's going to be linked in the show notes. You can also go to leandrawitchwood.com and find it there. But the Gardens of the Mystic will be launching January 2025. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for this. This is a true initiation program. It's going to be all online. There will be 2 versions of it, a self-paced and an in-person version where you're going to get direct mentoring with me and direct workshops, Q&A sessions with me. You'll work directly with me, so it'll be more guided, or the self-paced version. But this is a journey through various gardens that I have created that will touch on various esoteric topics, from the gods and primordial energy to creating magical items. I am getting certified in natural perfumes. And so I'll be bringing that knowledge to the course. I'll be teaching you how to make your own inks. I'll be teaching you how to make your own incense, teas, brews, you name it. So there are 18 gardens right now. So it's an 18-month program that I'm breaking out into 6-month chunks. And if this is something you're interested in, if you're looking for something that will help solidify your path, help give you that sense of foundation, this is going to be a great path for you. And it's open. It is based on the priestess archetype. So what that means is it's not exclusively women or feminine or female. It is feminine, yes. But it's not, it's open to all who want to explore and identify with the priestess path. And moving forward, I'll explain more of that as we go along, as I feed you more information about it. But yeah, if you want to get on the wait list, head over to my website and get on there, because I'm like beaming. Can't wait for this to get started.
Yeah. Oh, it's a beautiful way for you, I think, to revive a little bit your role as a community leader. Because I feel like,
sure,
it's been in flux, like it's been in, stasis a little bit. And
a little bit, yeah.
Now this is going to be something, like we were talking about it before, and my 2025 is also, I've been doing my planning with the land, and it's really, for me, and I think we both have come to this on our own, but now we're realizing it's coming together too, is that moving forward, especially these next crazy 4 years, we need to do the real work. Like I kind of am done with like I've had a lot of people ask me like, oh, when are you going to do your next like one-off workshop? And the answer is I don't know, because there's not enough time to go deep. They're a great place to get to know people. So I know I'm going to do at least one next year. But my main priority now is just going deep and having the students who want to do that,
do the deep work.
It's not to say that if you're new to this, you can't join the deep work. In fact, that's probably the best time to do it, is to just jump right in, instead of tiptoeing around, just jump into what your soul wants you to commit to. And that's commitment is a theme word for me for 2025.
Yeah. And that's really what this program is about. It's about committing to yourself and your path.
18 months. Whew.
18 months. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is I'm segregating it into levels. So you'll have, like level 1, level 2, and then level 3 is where you earn the mastery and the practitioner certification. So you can take this program to others and teach it. So part of the program, if you commit to the full 18 months and complete it, I'm giving you templates to help you go and lead your own circles, lead your own gardens, and walk others through these gardens so they can get that imagery, so they can understand the principles, these esoteric principles that we're going to touch on and really dive into. So you're initiating yourself through this program into a priestess path. And again, like I say priestess, but that's the archetype we're working with. So this is open to non-binary, trans. It's open to everybody. And I am so excited for it, because we need that inclusion right now. We need to develop that sense of belonging, and we need to fortify our communities. And I think this is for me, I know this is one way to do that.
Exactly.
And we all have work that we're called to, but we don't always have that structure that helps us do the work. And this is what I'm forming right now.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And for those called to the priestess path, if you are getting visions of snakes, you can't get snakes out of your head lately. If ochre, red ochre specifically, is something that you're thinking about, like it sounds crazy if you're not, but I know I've actually had 2 people message me just this week to say they are dreaming of ochre and they'd never heard that word before. What does it mean? So that's why I'm saying this now. If you are seeing glowing sconces of incense smoke, if you're seeing women barefoot with white skirts at their ankles, you are being called to join me on my priestess retreat to Delphi in April. And I've been speaking about it for a little while now, but I wanted to bring it up again because the early bird prices are ending December 15th. So if you put your deposit in before that date, you get a savings there. And it's going to be April 27th to May 2nd. So we'll be celebrating Beltane and the shift into the second half of the year together in that very powerful liminal time. And we will be visiting Delphi and other oracle sites. So this is a priestess retreat for anyone who identifies as a priestess. That's up to you to decide. Trans women are always welcome. Women and anyone who is non-binary are welcome. This is going to be a space to dive into your priestess path and experience the quantum leaps that sacred places, that Numina can hold for you. And these are places that I've personally built relationships with over the years. And you will get that wisdom. Like, and when I say quantum leap, it means a shift and transformation that you cannot fathom how it happened in a few days. It's in our time together. This is where time is the spiral, right? It is not a straight line. The experience of time is very different when you're watching a timer and you're planking at the gym than when you're, watching your favorite movie, right? And we're going to experience that a millionfold when we do this priestess work in Greece. So if you're called to that, I encourage you to email me. You can go to seekingnumina.com/Delphi retreat and get all the info. But email me and let's set up a time to talk and connect and really secure this place, because once again, commitment is coming in. If you're committed to your spiritual path and you know that you're ready to leap into your next phase and to really claim that title priestess, like if you're listening and you're like, oh my gosh, Elyse, this sounds amazing, but I'm not a priestess. I'm just stop right there. As soon as we hit the I'm just it's time to step into it. I'd love to have you there. Brandon Weston is a healer, writer, and folklorist who owns and operates Ozark Healing Traditions, an online collective of articles, lectures, and workshops focusing on the Ozark Mountain region. As a practicing folk healer, his work with clients includes everything from spiritual cleanses to house blessings. He comes from a long line of Ozark hill folk and is also a folk herbalist, yarb doctor, and power doctor. His previous books include Ozark Folk Magic and Ozark Mountain Spellbook. Visit him at ozarkhealing.com. Brandon, thank you for being here. Unfortunately, Leandra had a medical emergency and it was like right before recording. So she is with us only in spirit. She sends her regards, and specifically she said she wants to make sure we talk about plant allies and Ozark healing. So we will.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank you for being here, and thanks for sharing this book with the world. And also thank you for your work as a folklorist, cataloging and collecting what is, in my understanding, mostly traditionally an oral tradition.
Yeah, or mostly an oral tradition. Today, a lot of people are starting to record their family stories, things like that. They're starting to build, personal archives. And that excites me because, we get all of this wealth of modern traditional knowledge as well as what we can collect from the past.
Yeah. And it's so easy for these things to be lost. Like something that really confused me at first, but then started to make sense as I was reading through the book was how similar this is to Greek indigenous practices. Like out in the mountains here, like my family's from a village that essentially doesn't exist anymore. Like it's there, but there's like 7 or 8 families left because there's no more schools, there's no jobs, there's no internet. Like, what do you do? And so those traditions are dying off with the people. Nobody in Greece is really interested in recording it. I have a couple friends at the University of Athens who are doing their best, but it's imminent. It's pressing to record this stuff and save it. And at first I was like, why would America not care? But then I thought about it more. I was like, okay, I can see where people, we still are fighting for the rights of, maybe not rights isn't the word, but I guess the attention and the respect for traditions like the Ozark healing tradition.
Right. And what I found within my own family and, the greater Ozark family is like, and this is probably true across different cultures, is, when you're within the tradition, sometimes, it's just life. It's just how life works. And so I've met lots and lots of people who said, I never thought that this was something worth recording or worth learning. I just thought it was a part of the culture. And so it takes sometimes, maybe somebody from the outside to highlight things, or, somebody that like me that gets interested in like genealogy and folklore and family history to say, no, like this wasn't just a a normal part of our family. This is a part of a bigger culture, and yeah, it does tie in with lots of different things. And so yeah, I think sometimes when you're in the midst of it, it doesn't seem important, or it doesn't seem like something that might end. And so I always, try to encourage people, record family stories and while they're still around, because, there will reach a point, when you're in your old age where you'll say, oh, my grandpa had all of these different sayings, but I can't remember what they were now. And so even if you don't think it's important now, collect it for your future self, or collect it for your children or grandchildren, or even just interested people that might want to know that stuff later on.
Yeah, it's really important. And I think it's also interesting. I did not know this is where I jump in with this interview, but it made me think of something you shared on, I wrote the quote down because it was really like stood out to me. On page 177, you said, it's interesting to note communities who simultaneously condemn witchcraft while still supporting the role of their traditional healers. And this has long been the case in the Ozarks. It's exactly the same way in Greece. They will never, ever accept witchcraft, paganism. It's all heathenry. Get out of here with that. But you best believe if you think you found the one before you get married, you're going to go to the coffee reader and see what they have to say.
Or even just like what I found, with sort of like the Ozark religious traditions. I mean, all of that is tied up with what we might call magic, but they would vehemently, not call it that at all. So, the local preacher or local, religious figure who doubles as a healer because they're closer to God, because they have this calling. And so they have this sort of divine calling that they're able to use in the community, but they are also simultaneously condemning people who might be using it in a different way or might come from a different background, that sort of thing. And so that stuff is really interesting to look at. And, it's where we really have to be careful too, as sort of modern people and researchers and practitioners, how we approach, traditional culture and how we approach language. So, depending on who I was talking to when I was in my sort of collecting phase, I had to change how I spoke every single time. So, you can't mention witchcraft and magic to certain people, but then other people call themselves witches. So it's like you have to be able to sort of shift and change the way you talk about these things. But I think that's all like really fascinating. And I think that language does matter. And I think today we have an issue with grouping too many things under one definition or one heading. And so for me, the traditional approaches tend to be a little bit more diverse in their practices, actually, than, so today we might say, oh, all of this is witchcraft. But traditionally, it was a lot more complicated than that. And I think that's one of the things that we're losing as we lose traditional healers is we're losing the complexity. We're losing a lot of that. And for better or worse, I don't know. I'm kind of a go with the flow sort of person too. So
Yeah, I go back and forth with that too, thinking like, if like for myself, I'm extremely multicultural. I have Greek nationality, Egyptian nationality, and American nationality. And by the time this airs, Italian nationality, which I wasn't even pursuing, but my aunt, a lot of Americans are trying to get out of there. So she was like, our grandma was Italian. I think it's time to get that EU citizenship. So I got that like kind of grandfathered in. So for me, I'm like by nature eclectic, but I think about it all the time. I'm like, I don't want everything to just get diluted by that. Like I try really hard to be conscious of, okay, this is a Greek practice. This is from Silver Raven Wolf. This because those origins are going to get lost. Again, it's that recording of origin. And I think that's why witches and New Agers, come head to head. Like I love New Agers. I have a lot of friends that are New Agers. Like I don't think it's mutually exclusive, but I think that is where witches have the issue is we're like, well, hey, where's your source material? We gotta refer back to that. And actually, I had that question for you. So this is Ozark practice. Is it acceptable for somebody outside of the Ozarks to learn from these practices or even implement them?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, specifically. I mean, I publish for a pretty wide audience through Llewellyn. And so, yeah, I encourage anybody to, be able to pick up this stuff and incorporate it into your own practice. I think there are foundational parts of Ozark folk magic that have a lot to offer in the wider magical world. I think that, there are a lot of very important and meaningful connections that are a part of the folk tradition here, specifically this idea of simplicity in the practice. There's a lot of relying upon your own gift and your own intuition rather than relying upon the material culture. There's a lot of, this idea of this deep, deep connection to the natural world and the sort of auspiciousness that happens in the natural world when this like flow of magical energy through nature pools in places. And these are places that we can, we may be weak in our magic, but when we get into these sacred places, we become strong because we are in that flow in that moment. And so there are a lot of like very deep lessons that can come from Ozark practice. And that's one of the things that I want to share with people. And I encourage people to incorporate that. I always tell people when this question comes up in the classes and stuff, everything that I publish is the material that I feel like I am allowed to publish or have been told I am allowed to publish. So all of the secret stuff, I'll never publish. So if it's something that I'm publishing, then of course, you are welcome to take any of that stuff and to use it. Ozark folk practice, we're pretty young, like maybe 200 years old. Ozark people in the Ozarks goes back to only 1810, 1820. Before that, we were in Appalachia, and the practices were developing there, and were getting very complex and things. And so there's like an ancient sort of lineage through the practice, but a lot of what we do as a part of the practice, the physical stuff, is fairly young, actually. And also is not, Ozark culture didn't spring up out of the ground. And so it's like there are fingerprints of other cultures on our culture. And so, if you are a practitioner of, German folk magic, you'll find a place in the Ozarks, Pan sort of Northern European folk magic, you'll find a place here. Greek, you will definitely find a place in the Ozarks as well, which as a folklorist, I'm always like looking at these cross-cultural things. And so,
syncretism is my jam. I love it.
We'll probably have to talk like a lot more at some other point about like Greek connection, because there's a lot of like in the Ozarks, you see like a lot of very similar like Matiasma sort of evil eye practices popping up and stuff.
Yeah. It's like Malocchio too, like the Italian evil. Like you have a charm in there that's almost verbatim. It's incredible.
Yeah. And so, I encourage anybody, as the only thing that I say is, respect where it comes from. And I tell Ozark people that too, to respect where these things come from, because, I've encountered a lot of Ozark people who were vehement about, no, all of this stuff is European, all of it's from Europe. And it's like, no, when Europeans came to the New World, they had like 2% of the plant knowledge that, the indigenous people had. So like 90% of the plants that we use in the practice have indigenous sources, are from here. The knowledge would have come from indigenous people in the Southeast. And so, I encourage everyone, not just, not just the outsiders, the Ozarkers as well, to respect the ancestors of the practice wherever they came from, and also to respect the land. Not if you even if you're not in the Ozarks, to respect the land and the connections of the land, because that's an important part of this. And the right relationship for a magical practitioner with the world around them is that mutual love and respect, with the seen and the unseen as well.
That's my biggest thing I wanted to talk about, actually, is, and I saw the similarities with Greek views on land connection as well, which I loved. And it also even resonated with Slavic sort of, what's the book I'm thinking of? Madame Pamita's Slavic witchcraft book about Baba Yaga. She talks about it too, in Ukrainian tradition, but it is like a land up tradition. Like in the first half of the book, you introduce us in the beginning to the importance of looking at this as reactionary, like charms are reactionary, and I was like, well, okay, that's true, but what's the belief? What's the basis? And then you got more into this, it's because the land is holding us. It's almost like the protection and the warding and all those things are inherent in the everyday. It's just how Ozarkers live their life, is to have that concern and respect. And so there isn't the necessary caveat of reminding people to do those things. And I loved that. I think that's lost a lot.
Yeah, I definitely, this idea of the land supporting the people. I think also, Ozarkers really connect to, well, traditionally, and all of this stuff is changing in the modern world, but the sort of traditional view is really this very, very old peasant mountain people, and not from the Ozarks to the Appalachians to the Highlands in Germany to the Highlands in Scotland, mountain culture, this very old, very deep connection to the cyclical nature of the world around us. And so that is really where connection comes in. So the year is a cycle. The seasons are a cycle. You have the moon phases as an interior cycle within that. You have the zodiac moon phases, as an interior sort of cycle within that. You have the weekly cycle of the days, which are connected to planets, so the planetary cycle. Then you have the cycle of the day itself, sunrise and sunset. And all of these pieces of the cycle, they all have correspondences and connections and symbolism and meaning. And this is just, what sort of springs up when you have mostly an oral folk culture that is still very tied to the land as a provider. And that's one thing that we've lost today. We've forgotten that the land is a provider for us, as well as the cycles of our life as being a provider. And so traditionally, you might have, work that is in response to certain omens or tokens that would be seen. So, if a screech owl screams outside, you throw salt into the fire to take the cuss or to take the curse off of that situation, to maintain auspiciousness, to maintain that balance between all of the forces of the universe around you. But if you are just living within the cycles, if you're going with the flow of this cyclical nature of life, then you don't really have a lot to worry about. So, when the sun rises, you are reborn, you wake up, you do your morning activities as a part of this newness of life, newness of being reborn in the morning. And as you go to bed, you prepare for death, you prepare for this sleep state. And so, you say prayers, you have rituals in the fireplace, you smoke the house with juniper as a way of putting the house to sleep. And then you have these sort of bigger seasonal weekly cycles. You clean your house on Sunday to invoke the power of the sun, the illuminating power of the sun, to cleanse out everything that might have been gathered up throughout the week. And so this is all stuff that like we have to learn today, but our ancestors, it would have just been life. Like, of course, of course you do this on, this certain thing on the summer solstice. Of course you do this certain thing, in the winter time, or in the springtime. Of course you take these plant medicines at these specific times of the year. So all of this stuff would have been stuff that, our ancestors would have really had a very close connection to, that we have unfortunately lost. And so a big part of Ozark folk practice, and one of the things that I encourage for every practitioner, is to reconnect with cycles, even if it's, I have a problem remembering and connecting to the big seasonal cycles. I tend to get lost in that, but I try to connect to the moon phases. That's a very easy one to connect to. So doing very specific work on the full and new moon, orienting my life to those sort of waxing and waning cycles. And so, yeah, I always encourage people to connect to that. And that is going to be a natural source of auspiciousness, of power and protection. Because if you're connected to that, what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, that's beautifully said. That's so true.
Is your intuition tugging at you to deepen your relationship with your higher self? Do you feel like there is a greater mystery to your spiritual path, and you're ready to go back to the roots of earth priestessing to discover it? Are you dreaming of caves, bowls of red roses, or having visions of barefoot women in white gowns? The priestess path is calling to you. This is an invitation to call on the oracle and be anointed in the Pythia's sacred spring at Delphi. I am inviting you to dance with the nymphs to the beat of my drum in an ancient forest. Let's meet the muses in the olive groves, swim with the mermaids, release your fears, and embrace the power of the priestess you know you are meant to be. If you're ready to meet the land spirits and oracles of Greece's most famous sacred site and beyond, visit seekingnoumena.com/Delphi retreat and sign up to join me. Early bird ends December 15th.
I wanted to ask about the directions, because in Ozark practice, they seem very important. And they're also a little bit different than in other traditions.
Yeah. So some of our directional correspondences are most likely influenced by indigenous sources, actually. And so some of it definitely comes in from sort of pan-Northern European folk practice. So there's a very common association with the East. So the East, again, to connect to these cycles, observable cycles of nature, the East is the sun rising. And so there is this heavy aspect of cleansing, of newness, of rebirth, of healing. And so that has ancient origins, and then, close ties to Christianity. So the idea all old churches have an East-facing altar because, the symbol of the rising sun. And so then there's also the sort of pan-European associations with the West. So the West being the land of death, or the dying of the sun. In the Ozarks, the West, this has some associations and associated with sickness and with witchcraft specifically, but we're using witchcraft in the old way. So we could also say malign magics, magics that's aimed to hurt or to kill. And so also all of the entities, the lower order entities, are seen as living in the West. This has some connection to German folk magic. So in Ozark folk practice, a lot of the charms aim at sending things into the West. The idea being that you're sending whatever you're healing or removing, whatever curse you're taking out, or demon you're exercising, whatever it might be, you're sending it back where it came from. And so you're sending it into the West, where all of this evil sort of lives. The idea being that you're sending it there so that it won't want to come back. It won't come back to you. It'll stay in the West where it's meant to be. And then, so the East-West correspondences are pretty cross-cultural, at least from like a European heritage, but it's also cross-cultural, even within indigenous sources and across the world, because of the East-West sun rising, that sort of real visible symbolism. The North and the South is where it gets sort of different. So in the Ozarks, the North is considered the cold direction. And so it is like the land of cold, where cold illnesses come from. This, in part, we think comes from indigenous sources. The Muskogee Creek and the Cherokee have a similar directional orientation. All wet and cold illnesses come from the North. And then the South can be a direction of prosperity in the Ozarks, but it can also be associated with illnesses and certain types of sicknesses and things coming in as well. And so typically, in practice, everything that we sort of invoke, all of the blessings and auspiciousness that we invoke from the eastern direction. Everything that we're sending away, we send into the western direction. And then very rarely is the north and south ever mentioned. Unless it's like very specific illnesses that are being removed. One that I'm thinking of is a magical illness called live things, which is like sort of cross-cultural. You find it popping up in hoodoo as well. It's probably where we actually got it from. But it's this idea, it's a curse that, somebody has put inside your body, and it grows living creatures inside of you. And so this probably has some real world connection to actual internal parasites, but the symptoms are heightened. So the symptoms would be like feeling bugs crawling under your skin, which could be described by some types of like neuralgia and stuff like that. But this curse is considered a reptilian sort of wet, cold curse. And so in this case, some of the verbal charms would invoke the northern direction, or would send this stuff into the north where it originated from. But I would say, more often than not, we are going to be using the east or the west as a part of the practice.
Yeah, I noticed that. And it's so interesting too, how I wanted to ask this too. Is it because you say it's a reactionary practice, you don't pull out the charms unless you need to. And in that, would the north and south maybe be an indicator, like if a southeaster is coming through or whatever, one of those big storms, like would they say, okay, we got to watch out for these types of illnesses?
Yeah, definitely has connections to like observable omens or tokens within the world. So if a storm was coming from the north, or depending on what direction it comes in, it could bring certain illnesses. There's definitely a theory, sort of you can see a sickness theory going on, where, for instance, people would avoid spending too much time in damp places, because, and in the Ozarks, it's so humid here constantly. People are really conscious about things like, airing out the house if it's been storming. So after it storms a lot, when it starts to get sunny again, you always air out the house to get out the damp, to get out that. And so there's a practicality to that, to keep mold and things from growing in the house, because it is so damp here. But then there's also this like sort of psycho-spiritual sort of basis to that, where you're actually clearing out entities that might cause illnesses. So you're clearing out the damp as though the damp has a personality to it. And so you can see a lot of these sort of animistic qualities about the culture where, things are given a personification or personality, even though we as modern people might not associate it with that. So yeah, there are definitely, you can start to see this sort of health theory. And that's one of the things I tell people is like, we might have a lot more medical knowledge today, but these folk cultures, they were doing the best that they could with what they had. And in a lot of cases, they did things remarkably well. Remarkably well. I mean, a lot of the plants that are still being used today as a part of natural healing, these plants have very, very good and long lineages of being used with a lot of good success. And so the people in the past, we might think that they were simplistic, but it's not the case at all. There was a lot underneath the surface. So one example I always give is, it's a tradition here to drink sassafras tea. Sassafras is a tree that grows here. You get the roots and you drink this tea in the springtime. And traditionally it's, once the weather starts warming up and the rain comes, you start drinking it, and you drink it for, every day, a couple times a day for a couple weeks. And it's considered a tonic because you don't keep drinking it. It's meant to tonify the body. And there's all these theories around it, folk theories, like it clears the blood or it cleans the blood, all of which are euphemisms for it being a laxative more than anything. Or it like gets the body going after winter time. So you're coming out of hibernation, again, the cyclical path. But this has connections to like Greek and Roman theories about the humors. And so it goes directly back to humorism, to the idea that in the springtime, the spring is ruled by the sanguine or the blood humor, which is located in the liver and in the digestive system. And so in order to bolster that so that you don't have this wild sort of fluctuation of sanguine humor, you introduce things that work on the bowels and the liver. So sassafras is a liver tonic, is a digestive tonic. So you would drink sassafras tea to lower or to, help rebalance that sanguine humor that's coming in the springtime. And so, there are all these deep medical connections that people just sort of say, oh, well, that's just folk knowledge. It's just what people do. But there's actual like stuff there. There's actual theories and stuff behind it.
And I don't think they would have kept doing it if it didn't work, because that's the crux of all of it. It's not performative. It's not ceremonial. There's no audience. That really got me, actually, the idea that you keep it so secret that you were really, if you were a yarb doctor or, in the old days, you would not really be given, like today, maybe we can get respect, clout, even wealth from spiritual healing. But that was not the case. It was a target on your back, essentially. It seems that way. Like it wasn't in your best interest, really. It was almost a duty that you were performing.
Yeah, it was seen as a gift. And that's the way it's really always been referred to. It is a gift. And the idea is that it's a gift from the divine, from God, whatever you want to call it. But it's a gift that was given. And so to gain from the gift is wrong. This idea of you don't own it. You're only borrowing it until death. And so this idea that you keep it well protected because it is a gift and you don't want to squander it. So the whole secrecy aspect came about because, and not because you don't want people to know your patented formula or whatever, but the secrecy came about because you want the power to continue, because you want to still be able to help your family in the community. And so the idea is that if you spread this stuff around, or if too many people hear what you're doing, it dilutes the power, and the power will eventually leave you, or the gift will eventually leave. And so you keep it sort of secret because you want it to last. And you want it to keep going until you are ready to pass it down to, a student or an apprentice or whoever you want to pass it down to. And so I think we've kind of lost some of that connection today. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think that knowledge is power. And so I get asked this a lot, like, the old culture is, you keep it secret. How do you feel about sharing all these verbal charms and stuff? And for me, this is a way for me to preserve the culture and to continue it. I encourage people to keep things secret, to have parts of your practice that are just for you, that just you know about. And when you're working with other people, if you're using verbal charms and prayers, to say them under your breath, even if they are published out there, keep them for yourself. And especially the charms and things that you create, or that, you dream, or, somebody delivers to you. Keep those things secret. We don't have to publish everything on Instagram or whatever. We can keep some things to ourselves. But I think it's also important to educate people, especially now, because we have so few traditional healers left, that honestly, if we went by the old practices, nothing would be left. It would all go away. And there's an argument that can be made that that's just the natural way of these practices, that's just what happens. Practices die. If we think about all of the countless cultures who have, completely lost everything that they've had, maybe this is just the natural evolution of society and things. But I also know that this power works whether you teach it openly or not. I have lots of experience with everything, that all the rituals and charms that I've published, I have used with success. And so that for me is also a way of saying, well, maybe our secrecy, our taboos and things, maybe those aren't needed anymore. Maybe we've shifted into a place where openness is what we need, and maybe is what's going to help preserve this stuff. And so I think that we can have a balance between what we are open with and what we keep for ourselves. And I really think that it's very important to have something for yourself, to have some practice, whether it's a connection to like a religious practice or a spiritual practice that only you do and only you really know about, then, whatever it might look like. I think that is important.
Hey there, witches. Did you know that there's an entire community out there dedicated to you and your journey? The Rebel Mystic community is a space where I offer my decades of knowledge and experience to witches just like you. I do this through live events, monthly mentoring, monthly rituals, a book club, and other resources like workbook pages and meditations. There is even a complete self-paced course library you can access. Check the link in the show notes to learn more about this community and how to become a member. Blessed be.
So we can't talk about Granny Thornapple's Book of Charms without talking about Granny Thornapple. So how did you get the idea to create a character and introduce each chapter with these incredible stories? Like, I got so invested, I almost wanted to skip the charms and go keep reading about Anne.
Yeah, and I've definitely told people, like, you can just read the story too and use the rest of it as sort of reference material. Like, that's okay too. So before the first book came out, Ozark Folk Magic, I I was a researcher collecting stories, but I've also been a storyteller, pretty much all my life. Like it's just something I really like doing. And so I was collecting stories, not just to collect them and preserve them, but also I was trying to learn stories. And so a lot of the stories, the traditional folk tales and things that I learned were about these powerful characters, these witches, these granny women. And surprisingly, a lot of the folk tales were very gracious to them. We have this sort of European idea that came over to the New World about like, all of the witch stories, somehow the witch gets killed or gets bested or whatever. But there are a lot of these Ozark folk tales that will simultaneously sort of condemn this character, but then also present this character as a sort of hero. And so there's one of my favorite sort of subgenres of Ozark folk tales are witch revenge stories. And these are stories where somehow like in one story, there's a businessman who's moved into the Ozarks and he's going to clear cut this hill, this mountain, and he comes across this old lady that's pretty much standing in the way. And so he gets his goons to kill her and tear down her house and everything. And then he like moves his family in, they build this fancy house, and then she starts appearing and torturing them in the night and things and scaring them. And her face will appear in the fireplace and yell at him until finally they get so spooked that they get ran out of town. And so this is like, when you read stories like this, it's like, well, who am I supposed to identify with here? Clearly, I'm supposed to identify with the witch, right? Like this, saving this small town from this like big city businessman. And so there are lots of those types of stories. And I really wanted to create a character that was able to honor those stories. So was a character that showed both the sort of the burden of the healer in the community, so being criticized by the community, being neglected by the community in a lot of cases. I wanted to show that aspect as well as the aspect of how important these figures were for the community, not just for the physical health but the spiritual health of the community, and the community being the unseen as well, the spirits of the land and things like that. And so I wanted to create this character that was a sort of amalgam of a lot of these other characters, as well as incorporated in teachers of my own, people, sayings that I remember them having and like things that they did in the community. So I wanted to create this character that would be, a real sort of representative of this Ozark folk tradition. So even before I started writing the first book, I started writing stories. I have a creative writing background as well. I like writing fiction. I like telling stories. And so I was already writing creating these folk tales, and Granny Thornapple was sort of born in that. And so then with the book itself, Granny Thornapple, I wanted to revive this idea of the teaching story. And so this, in oral folk cultures, everything that you learn has to come from storytelling. And that's how we are able to remember these things. It's why, if you ask most Americans, to recite a Mother Goose rhyme or whatever, they'll have at least one that they remember, or a fairy tale from their childhood. They'll at least have one or two. These are cautionary tales, but they're also teaching stories. And just like we can learn about the dangers of the world through these types of stories, healers and magical practitioners have been passing down information and foundational points of view through teaching stories for centuries, for thousands and thousands of years even. So I really wanted to revive this Ozark tradition of the teaching story and help connect it to specifically verbal charms and prayers, this part of the tradition that doesn't necessarily rely on a lot of outward ritual, but sort of relies upon the inward power and the connection to that gift by way of these memorized verses and charms and nursery rhymes and things like that. So Granny Thornapple was sort of a way for me to create a teacher, so to give people a teacher that, like a teacher I had, and also be able to sort of give people a glimpse into the life of these healers, these powerful people.
Yeah, I love that. My novel comes out next year, and it's actually about that sort of thing. It's about, I call it, it's called What the Water Remembers, and I call it a novel to empower witches in and out of the broom closet, because Kendra is dealing with these ghosts in her home. She's got hauntings. She also has a little bit of, how do I tell my dad I'm a witch going on, and how's my husband going to deal with this now that we're taking this next step together? But also, like, she does some serious magic. And my hope is that people will feel empowered to start doing magic because they see it in a story, and they'll remember what to do in the ritual because they remember Kendra doing it. And I feel like that's so important. Like, I would 100% read Granny Thornapple's story. Like at one point, I forget which chapter, it skips and she's like on her 39th birthday. I was like, oh man, what was Anne up to for the past 20 years? Like, I need to know.
Right. Yeah. And I've definitely, got more Granny Thornapple planned. Including more stories. So, yeah, I've definitely not finished with the story, even though, it goes from her birth to death in the book. There's a lot of stuff that happens in between those moments. And there are other tales that can be told, not just with Granny Thornapple, but with other traditional healers that I've written about. And so that is definitely one of those things that, having written Granny Thornapple, I now understand more the power of the teaching story and the power that fiction, fiction in quotes, fiction can have, and what it can teach us and what it can help us remember. So, yeah, I really wanted to structure the book in that way so that, each chapter is topical. And so the story that you read about Granny Thornapple is related to the content of the chapter. And so with like protection magic, I really wanted people to read her story and then be able to connect to the verbal charms and the practices within that chapter. And yeah, maybe relate them back to Granny Thornapple's experience in the story. So I think that it is definitely an area that I am wanting to explore more. And I think that there's a lot of tales that need to be told. And honestly, for a very long time, the folklorists, especially in the Ozarks, the stories that they were telling and the things that they were collecting were very rarely from practitioners themselves. There were stories that were told about practitioners. And the intention that I've had with all of the books, all three of them now, has been to try in my own way to tell the stories that the practitioners tell, that, to be able to allow the people that haven't really had a voice in this area to now be able to speak and tell what they want to tell. So that we're not just reading about people talking about other people. We're letting those people talk for themselves.
You may have noticed that here at the Magic Kitchen podcast, we don't have sponsored ads. That's because this is a fully listener-supported show. We do what we do for you, dear listener, and when you join my magical living community on Patreon, you're supporting all the time and energy that goes into setting up podcast interviews, writing articles and rituals, my paranormal mystery novel, and all that I do. If you love this podcast, consider joining my magical space. I can't wait to meet you and be an even bigger part of your magical journey. Go to patreon.com/Elyse Wells or follow the link in the show notes.
So our last question.
Mm-hmm.
Plant allies are something me and Leandra talk about a lot because her business is tea. She has the Witchwood Tea House. And my main work, it's the only way I stay sane, like with having so many cultures and living in so many different countries over my life, is connecting to the land directly, wherever I am. It's what keeps me rooted and sane. So, and I love that about this book. It's very present in there. So how are trees and other plants integral to Ozark healing tradition. And I want to talk about stump water.
Stump water, yeah. um, well, so Ozark folk magic and folk healing practices really can't be separated from the land, but the land doesn't have to be the Ozarks. This is where a lot of the traditions were born. And I think that there is a power to the mountains, like to mountainous regions in general. But that's like a whole other topic. And like, I have lots of theories about it. But at the end of the day, like the heart of the practice is the land, is connected to the land. This was born out of necessity originally. Like, if you couldn't grow it or gather it, then you wouldn't have it. So, all of the food, all of the medicine had to come from the land because there was nowhere else to get it. And so this creates a very tight knit relationship. The land becomes your family. And also all of the entities, visible and invisible, become your families as well. And so this is the birth of, land spirit practices in general. So whether it's, leaving a portion of your crops for the little people so that they will bless your crops next year, or, hanging offerings in a tree, or burying things, or, blessing a river and then using the river to cleanse as a part of healing rituals and things like that. Everything is so connected to the land, but everything is connected to the land at a very intense spiritual level. And because it is such a spiritual level, we need not be on the land or with the land to invoke the power of the land or to have the land as a presence within our work. And so an example of this with plant allies specifically, I've worked with so many mountain herbalists, and the wealth of knowledge that these people have. One guy I worked with, we went through his collections of plants and stuff, and at least 200 different plants that he used that he had memorized. And so like it's very intense. But because plants are spirits, and there is this sort of spiritual connection to the landscape, I also worked with a teacher who was very influential in my practice, and she was an herbalist and had a wealth of knowledge about plants. She prepared plant medicines, things like that. But she had such a connection to the plants that she used that even if she didn't have the plants on hand, she could call upon those plants for what she needed to do. And this happened lots of times. We'd be like in the grocery store wandering around, and somebody would ask her to pray for them, and for certain illnesses, and she would call upon the plants that she knew would help in that situation. Even though she didn't make a tea, she didn't make a salve or anything like that. She just called upon them and they showed up because she had such a good relationship with those spirits of those plants. And so I think sometimes we can really get lost in the ingredients. We can, and ingredients are great. Following a recipe is good work, and it's going to produce something that's really nice. But I think also being able to approach practice as, ask yourself the question, what do I do when I don't have this stuff? When I don't have it around me, when I'm out in the world, are you just not going to do anything? Are you not going to like work your magic? Like if you need to protect yourself, what are you going to do without your stuff around you? And I think this is where folk magic practices like in the Ozarks really has something to offer, because it says you can have this very intense spiritual connection, not just your own gift to be able to draw upon that power without any stuff around, but you can have an intense spiritual connection to the land and to the spirits of the plants that you work with, and you can carry them with you, and you can specifically carry them in your body with you. So now that no matter where you are, you can draw upon this power. You can invoke these guides, these spirits, these helpers. One healer that I worked with called all the plants she worked with, she called her little angels, So that's sort of for the Christian audience that may be uncomfortable with using the word spirit. You can think of them as angels too, as these sort of holy beings, these sacred beings. So they can actually live within you. They can live, in that place within you where that gift is, and you can actually draw upon their knowledge and their power out in the world. And so I think, like, to go back to the idea of plant guides and plant allies, the plant itself is such an important part of that relationship, but is only the physical part of that relationship. Like, the plant is only the physical manifestation of an energy, of an archetype, of a spirit. And so, if you are wanting to get, I would suggest, if you're wanting to get in on the plant ally path, working with plants, to make sure that you always approach them as both the physical and the spiritual, because they are not, just like we aren't separate from physical and spiritual, they aren't separate as well. And so, yeah, plants are really important. Stump water was the other one that you were
Yes, stump water. It's such a cool ingredient.
Yeah. So stump water is interesting. So there's a sort of a lot of the ingredients and the plants and materia that we work with in the Ozarks, we work with it because it has auspiciousness. And I talk about auspiciousness a lot. And I realize a lot of people don't understand what auspiciousness is because it's not a natural part of our culture. A lot of Eastern cultures have auspiciousness like intimately tied with their culture. I think at one point we had this in the West, but it has since been lost. But auspiciousness can be called like luckiness or blessedness. It is basically in relation to folk practice and folk work. Auspiciousness helps raise the likelihood that your work is going to be success. So, if your ritual, you aren't very confident in what you're doing, you can raise the auspiciousness. You can level it up, if you will, by adding auspicious ingredients or by working within the cycles of nature, because that provides natural sources of magic. And so a lot of the materia that we use because it is auspicious. And it is auspicious because it is hard to find. So there's a rarity aspect to it. It is very potent. So a lot of our auspicious ingredients are also sometimes used as poisons because of that potency. So, it's a very fine line between poison and medicine. The item comes from like a spooky location. So, for instance, in certain practices, we use water that is drawn from inside of a cave. And so it is auspicious because it's never seen sunlight. It's never had sunlight touching it. And so you would put it in like a clay jug so that, light wouldn't touch it, and then use it in certain practices. That is auspicious because of the location that it came from. And so likewise, things like stump water. Stump water is auspicious because it is weird, because there is an oddness about it, because there is a rarity about it. You have to find a stump that is hollowed out enough to where it collects water, but not enough to where the water would run out, or I've actually found more stump water in growths on trees. So, sometimes trees will create like a little bowl at their base, or like burls, or like, all of these things that will collect water. And so stump water traditionally has been like a cure for warts and blemishes and all sorts of like skin stuff. It was considered like, if you could find it, it would, cure all of your like beauty needs, apparently. But it also just has this like auspicious quality about it, in that it can add blessedness or luckiness to your work. So stump water, just like cave water or water collected on certain holy days, things like that, they all can add auspiciousness. So they would be used in rituals where water was present. So, for instance, adding some stump water to your bath water as a cleanse, or, using some stump water along with cave water or well water, spring water, these other types of auspicious water, and pouring it over your head as a physical cleanse. Or adding some to your mop bucket to mop your house as a cleanse. So the stump water in and of itself, it can just add magic. It can add that auspiciousness. It can add that magical power to whatever you add it to. But there are also stories about, stump water, like holy water, driving away demons and vampires and things like that. So you can also keep it around for that purpose as well. Some of the old remedies and rituals, they recommend drinking it, consuming it. I don't recommend that. Because it collects things from the tree and bacteria and fungi and all this other stuff, and it might be okay for you, but you can use it in external magical practices to great great success, and you don't necessarily have to drink it.
When I was a kid, so my family on my mom's side is from Virginia, most of them, and they still have the family farm that they first came over in 1604 and got. Like, it's the same land for like a million years at this point. It's like over 400 years. And that land there has so much power. Like, I remember as a little kid visiting, like, I think I was probably 4 when I remember the first we would go every year, the first conscious memory of it. Because I grew up in Pennsylvania, just for that context. But there were stumps and they would collect water. And I remember feeling the same way I felt about them as I felt about tide pools. Like, I would just like sit at the stump with my head, like just staring at it, just watching and like looking for something to come. And I remember like just not wanting to touch it. Like, it felt, I guess, sacred. I mean, I wouldn't have used that word as a kid, but I was obsessed with like this liminality. Like, what is this water? Why is it here? It's just staying here. What's it going to do? Where's it going to go? Like, I just couldn't stop watching stump water. And so when I read that it was a magical ingredient, I was like, oh, of course it is. And my equivalent, because we have olive trees, which definitely would collect rain, but we don't get rain in Greece until probably September. We got a really weird flash storm in July, but it's summer as we're recording this. So I'm thinking to myself, like, man, I really want to do some stump water magic. But as we're talking, I'm like, oh, tide pools, they kind of have that same energy.
Yeah, they definitely do that. And I would say, like, anything that is sort of has that unusual quality to it can be auspicious too. And so one water, there's like 1,000 different types of water that you can use in Ozark folk magic, but one type is water that collects, for instance, on a church bell. Like the dew that you can wipe off of a church bell in the morning and then ring out, that water being sacred, or water that collects in, like the headstones in a graveyard, or things like that. So this idea of just, the rarity of the situation, the oddness of the situation, as being an indicator that this is something sacred or something auspicious. I love the idea of the tide pools, though, because it's very similar. This idea of this water is set apart. It is, it is different from this other water, because of how it has collected. So I would definitely use tide pool water, things like that.
Yeah. It's a really inspiring book, Granny Thornapple's Book of Charms. Like, I found myself thinking like, oh, I want to bookmark that. Okay, I want to come back to that. Like, just the simple ideas that are just a bit different, So I'm really excited. I hope lots of people read and learn. And like I was saying before we started recording, I'm going to be looking at getting Ozark Folk Magic, because I feel like I wanted that context. And I was like, oh, that's right. This is kind of not a sequel, but a companion. So I need to go back.
Yeah, the first 2 books, the first book, specifically Ozark Folk Magic, is a lot of the history, but the history is important, understanding the
that's what I wanted
and everything.
I was looking up maps and just getting that view in my head.
Yeah, orienting yourself in the Ozarks.
Exactly.
And then I go into a lot of the foundational theory, the medical theory and the magical theory, which is also very important stuff. And then in the spell book is really the workbook. It's the practice. So, you take all the information from Ozark folk magic and then you put it into practice with the spell book. And then I think to orient, Granny Thornapple with the trilogy, Granny Thornapple is like the spell book is all of the spells that you can do when you have your stuff with you. And then Granny Thornapple is all of the spells and rituals you can do when you don't have your stuff with you.
Yeah.
So it's really about like what you do when you're in your ritual space versus what you can do when you're out in the world or, addressing the needs of your community and things like that. And so I think all of them sort of, it all works together to create this sort of beautiful practice that's able to address, the needs of the community wherever you are.
Are you enjoying the show? If you are, we'd really appreciate a 5-star review. It helps us to reach more listeners like you and to keep doing the Magic Kitchen podcast. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here on the Magic Kitchen, and tell us where listeners can follow you, where you prefer them to buy the book, all those good things.
So the books are available across the internet. You can order them directly through Llewellyn as well. Llewellyn Worldwide is the publisher. And I'm starting to figure out like they're in more and more bookstores around, not only around the country, but around the world. People will email me. There was a guy that had emailed me that, he found the books in Australia. They found the books in Britain and all these different places. So the Ozark diaspora is definitely like out there, but you can buy them across the internet as well. And then I have a website, ozarkhealing.com, where I do all of my announcements, things like that. I now have a Patreon. It's Patreon Ozark Healing Traditions on Patreon. If you want to, follow some of the content that I produce there, as well as Instagram Ozark Healing Traditions. So I do classes and lectures and book signings and all sorts of cool stuff. So I announce all of that across all of those platforms. So
awesome. Well, thanks again for being here, and I'm looking forward to the next book and going back to the first two.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Merry meet,
merry part, and merry meet again.
Thank you for joining us on the Magic Kitchen podcast. Please visit my website, leandrawitchwood.com, for news, information, and more episodes.
I'm Elyse Wells, and I can be found at Seeking Numina on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and seekingnumina.com. That's Seeking, Numina.